Hi, welcome back to the Monthly Dose. My name is Elaine Chang, your host, with my co-host, Dr. Charles Ackle.
Hi, Elaine.
Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Today, we're going to talk about how your microbiome impacts your longevity, as well as how your immune system can be, as well as how we can protect your immune system against accelerated aging. Right. So accelerated aging is a really interesting topic. It's also known as inflammaging. So inflammaging stands for inflammation-related aging. Mm-hmm. Specifically, what does that mean?
Well, I suppose the easiest way to understand that is to look at people with HIV/AIDS. Mm-hmm. If you think about a sort of poster child for bad inflammation, a human immunodeficiency virus tells you everything you need to know in the name, right? And so your immune system is shot to bits. And we know, certainly it was obvious before the modern retroviral treatments came in, it was obvious that these poor patients were aging rapidly. If you wanted to see immune-induced aging, just had to look at an HIV patient, and they just wasted away in front of your eyes. They lost muscle mass. They turned into almost skeletons. It was awful. Right?
Yeah, it's very sad.
And that really tells you probably all you need to know. And even with retroviral treatment, they still age a bit more quickly than Joe Ordinary, but it's getting better. So that probably explains, I think, in a simple way, the critical effect of the immune system on the aging process.
Right. And your microbiome is critically involved with the immune system, right? Because your gut is the largest organ in your immune system.
That's it. And so you can't talk about immunity without talking about the microbiome, right? And so it's very, very important to understand that the immune system has a number of roles. We think of it as just dealing with infection or dealing with cancer or whatever. It's actually more complicated. The immune system has a protective role, so that if somebody's going to attack you in terms of a virus or whatever, it'll react. If something triggers and goes through your skin or a parasite, it'll react. So there's a protective role, but there's also a reconstructive role. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about aging is your ability to repair things that have been damaged. So if you think of a computer, your hard disk gets repaired or restored and cleaned up. In fact, your brain at night when you go to sleep, there's a whole process of cleaning up and moving memories and storing memories and, that cleaning up process. The same way the immune system has a cleaning up process for your entire body. And that's what keeps you in tune. But like a computer or other things, it clags up. It can get clogged up with all sorts of rubbish, and it doesn't work properly. So the immune cells that go around and the macrophages, they're the big eaters.
I call them the hungry hippos, or like the vacuum that just kind of sucks up all the bad stuff.
That's it. They come and take it all up and clear it out, and then they send in the trucks to repair it and all that sort of stuff. That's a very sophisticated mechanism which works very well until it doesn't. And then when it stops working properly, you start getting the features that we associate with aging: gray hair, bit of balding, arthritis,
collagen, aging of the skin, big things for the ladies.
Exactly. And so that's when your repair processes don't function particularly well. And that's part of your immune system. It's the immune system that does that reparative process. I talk to the kids about healing factor and Wolverine in Marvel comics.
They heal really quickly.
Your healing factor doesn't work properly. In Wolverine, it works very, very quickly. So we take a bit more time. So don't go and do anything silly at home, kids, right? But the healing factor is really important. But it corrupts. It doesn't work very well after a while. And that's because your immune system is corrupted. Now, how do you try and help that? And the answer is that you try and make sure it's kept in tune. And one of the ways is having a good microbiome. Why do we know this? Because if you look at the microbiome of a 100-year-old who is fit and well and, still smoking and chasing the maid and doing all sorts of interesting things, they are very similar to the microbiome of a 20-year-old. Mm-hmm. So again, there's a clue. that there's something interesting going on. So the person who can maintain a really good microbiome will probably maintain a good, healthy aging process, right?
So we can't talk about longevity without talking about the immune system and the health of the microbiome.
No. I don't think there's any question that the two are inextricably linked. By the way, you can help yourself by choosing parents who live for a long time, eating properly, taking a bit of exercise, doing all the things that you should be doing anyway. So you can't just sit there and take some supplement and hope it's going to work. You got to do a bit more
It's all
work.
connected.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
So are you telling me that if we did a little peek inside everyone's microbiome, they've got different ages, right? I could be chronologically 60, but biologically I could have the microbiome of a 20-year-old?
Exactly.
If I live in a blue zone.
Yes. And the blue zones...
What is a blue zone?
Well, the blue zones, are those areas of the world where there's an excess of 100-year-olds and above.
My kind of people. Right?
Well, yeah, it's just come a little bit into disrepute at the moment because there are also nice blue zones. I mean, there's Okinawa in Japan, for example.
Nicoya in Costa Rica.
Yeah, exactly, and all these other places. Unfortunately, there's been a little bit of hanky-panky and that some of these blue zone guys have
longevity drama.
Yeah, well, what they've been doing is actually they're not that old. They've been cheating to get the government to pay them their pension, and so they pretend to be somebody else, and it goes on and on and on. Or somebody actually has died, but they still think is alive. So that said, there are indeed, and we all have relatives, I think, of one sort or another, or know of somebody who's lived to be 100. The problem is, they're still running around and they're smoking and drinking and everything else. So it's sort of a bad,
You're breaking some bomb. You're dropping some bombs right now. You're telling me that the blue zones don't. It's not that the blue zones don't exist, but the numbers of centenarians, which are people who live on this earth and get to 100 years old, those numbers may be slightly off or incorrect because people aren't reporting the deaths.
Yes, there might. There's some recent evidence that there has been some manipulation of the figures, and we'll leave it at that. But there's no question that there are areas of the world where people seem to live to a long and happy and useful life.
And how? Like, what exactly is it? Do they all just live next to the ocean? What does that mean?
Well, they often are more likely to be in the mountains, actually. But I think the biggest thing is diet. In these people, it tends to be they have a very good, healthy diet, and they've got a very diverse microbiome. And we mentioned that, they've got the microbiome of a 20-year-old. So they don't show inflammation in the same way. Now, in animals, there are a number of animals out there that don't express inflammation very well and live for extremely long periods of time. The mole rat, who I think we mentioned before, is one. It's a very ugly little beast, poor thing.
Did you say to me your goal should be to be a mole rat?
Well, if you look at one, you might not.
They're kind of really cute.
Ugly.
They're kind of cute.
Yeah, well, yeah, yes, they are very ugly. But they live a long time. They don't get cancer and all that sort of thing. So you want to be a bit like a mole rat, but without the cosmetic problems.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to Benjamin Button, so it would really like to go that direction.
Yeah.
So that's so interesting. There's a lot to unpack there. I think that for baseline understanding for all of our listeners back home, longevity is broadly described in two categories, right? Your lifespan and your health span. So can you define those for us?
Well, your lifespan's your chronological age, and if you're 100, you're 100, whichever way you cut it. But your biological age can be very different. You can have the biological age of a 20, 30, 40-year-old, depending on how fit you are. And that fitness boils down to just how well you've looked after yourself generally. Probably there's also the factor of having good genes. You need to be lucky. If you've got good genes, you will survive. And I don't mean the things you wear on your pants.
No, not those genes. Not those genes.
You choose your parents carefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you've got long-lived parents, the odds are you're going to live quite a long time.
So I heard that if you have grandparents that are over the age of 90, you have a substantially higher rate. You have a substantially higher chance of making it to 100.
Yeah, and generally, I think people will accept that. I do. I think it's great to have long-lived relatives, but more important that those long-lived relatives live a happy life, that they don't suffer from dementia or problems and arthritis and things like that limit their enjoyment of life. We go back to Tithonus, poor old Eos wasn't going to have much in the way of sexual relations with poor old Tithonus after a while. However good looking he was originally.
Right.
So, but you need quality of life. That's really, really the big deal.
And this goes back to your story, right? Which is about eternal youth. You don't just want eternal. You also want youth.
Yeah.
Or youth actually represents fitness, which is your health span, your quality of life, your cognitive function, your physical function, the ability, the capacity to feel emotions. A lot of times we discuss things like neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And I would almost rather not have the ability to live longer if I don't have cognitive function with me.
Exactly. And I think most people would share that. As a doctor, I've seen what happens with mental degeneration, and it's tragic. It's very distressing, and it's getting more common. We're seeing an epidemic of it, partly because people have been living longer. Interestingly, though, the American population has, for the first time, has had a drop in its longevity scale. Yeah. Now, whether that's to do with COVID or what, I don't know. But I think it sort of fits in with what we were saying about an increased risk of cancer in 50-year-olds and below. Yeah. We're seeing this epidemic of young, and that means 50 and below, cancers. And that's fairly new. Now, where did that come from? We can't help thinking that it's to do with our environment. It can't just be genes. It must be an environmental component. And we know that air pollution is a problem. We know that pollution in the environment is a problem besides the air. We know that the food we eat is not good. We know that there's much more stress in society, which we have to cope with, particularly in the urban jungles that we've discussed.
Stress, my hometown, New York City.
Yeah, New York, is a stressful place, and we it's not easy. So, but that's not to say everybody's got to go and become a country lad, but because they're not exactly without their problems, but they have a better chance of dealing with it.
Yeah.
So there are so many factors, but I'm worried about the way that society has changed in the last 10, 15 years, where we're seeing a reduction in the age peak, which we didn't expect to see. It's now 82 or something. And we're seeing these cancers and other diseases, and we're seeing an increase in Alzheimer's, which is really worrying. And I don't want any of those.
What's wild is we have all this technology, all these scientific breakthroughs, and our lifespan and our lifespan's declining. Something's not right?
Exactly.
And our environmental process, the way we're living our lives, we're seeing more premature aging rather than an extension of and prolonging the idea of aging. So I think that what it comes down to is understanding on this side of the spectrum, we have blue zone centenarians, right? People who live up to 100 years of life. And then we have people who suffer from autoimmune conditions and are dying early. Like you said, 50% of the population will get cancer, 30% of them will die from that. Is there something that we can unpack here around, like, what is the main driver and cause? What can we?
So the poster child, if you like, to me, as a surgeon and an old surgeon, is HIV. I know from my own experience, when patients have got terminal cancer, they waste away. They become hollow-cheeked, they lose weight, they lose strength. And it's tragic. It's devastating. So that's to do with energy, and I'll come back to energy in a second. But the other thing that I remember seeing, because I'm so old that I remember those original cases of HIV that came in before we even knew what it was, and all those people who had active human immunodeficiency virus aged. They aged. Today with treatment, that's not so bad, but they still die younger than they should. But the aging process was dramatic. You could see it in front of your eyes. People were turning into old folk. And so that tells you that the fundamental process is to do with your immunity. and your ability to control and reconstruct and repair, and that if that is corrupted, you're in big trouble, right? And we know, for example, that these viruses, more importantly, these cancers, and by the way, HIV is strongly associated with cancer development, as you know, Kaposi's sarcoma par excellence, but all the other things that come along. So and I've told you about this, that the energy is the secret. And you get this, the mitochondria, which are the batteries, the energizer batteries in your cells, are what power your cells. And now if you've got good energizer batteries, your energizer bunny is doing his stuff, you're actually pretty fit. But along comes cancer or HIV, but particularly cancer, we know just in the last couple of years, will steal the mitochondria from normal cells. It will actually extract them, and it'll replace them with the rubbish used up batteries, mitochondria that they have. And I find that absolutely mind-boggling, and that's incredible. So the cancer is actually behaving as an individual, as a parasite.
Yeah.
And then the patient, of course, ages. And whether it's because they then develop arthritis, or they develop, or other autoimmune disorders that weaken them, they lose weight, they lose muscle strength, and they fade away.
It's super sad, and it's horrible. I think we all know someone who's been affected by cancer. When these cancer cells steal energy, right? What happens to our healthy cells? We have cellular dysfunction. Like, what is this process that happens that accelerates this aging and this wasting away?
Well, the batteries have to be stolen from healthy cells, because that's where the energy is. It's all about energy, the second law of thermodynamics and all that. Cancer cells need energy.
It's all about energy.
And your brain, by the way, of course, needs huge amounts of energy. So, but the mitochondria are stolen and they're used up. So if you use up energy, you haven't got the energy then to fight and repair and reconstruct. And that's why people waste away, and quality of life suffers. So it's not difficult to explain the longevity. Now, you can go and try and get stem cells and say, and every billionaire in the world wants to live forever, so they go and, they'll go and do stem cell implants and this, that, and the other, in the hope of trying to regenerate these young cells. And in certain situations, it may well be possible that they get some function. But I think just going into it blindly is quite dangerous, because you don't know whether some of these cells, because they're omnipotent, stem cells are omnipotent, they can turn into anything. What's to stop them turning into something you don't want them to turn into, like a malignancy? Potential
adverse reactions.
Yes. Yeah. And so you need to be, the jury's still out on all that sort of stuff, whatever anybody tells you.
I mean, there's so many treatments and therapies and medications you can take out there now, but at the very least, to be invested in longevity, you just need to care about the foundational building blocks, right? Is your diet right? Is your sleep right? Is your exercise right? These are all things that we all need to correct before we can start to think about stem cells and really advanced technologies. Especially for these blue zones that we're talking about, the main things that you're seeing there is daily exercise built into these senior citizens. They have to climb hills to go to church every single day. They have a great diet. It's very diverse. They have excellent microbiomes, like you've mentioned, very important. And they have community, right? They have built-in community where they can help each other, they support, they don't feel lonely, their emotional health is intact. And then they also have purpose. So purpose is a huge thing too, because it relates back to your emotional and mental well-being. And we covered that in our gut-brain axis episode. Your gut and your brain are super connected, right? So if you're struggling up here, you'll feel it down there. If you're feeling it down there, you feel it up here.
Exactly.
So when it comes to this healthy microbiome that we're discussing, what does this mean in terms of inflammation? It means that these people are eating a really diverse diet and therefore don't have inflammation?
Yes, they have far less inflammatory changes than the people who are otherwise badly affected. And so interesting what you said about societal things, that enhances the diversity of their microbiome.
No way.
So, So if you've got a mother and child, yes, they share a big chunk of microbiome. You've got a loving partner who hugs and kisses you, you get a bit more. if you've got an extended family that live together, and then they share more and more of their microbiome.
Interesting.
So the microbiome is actually quite important. And you need to farm your microbiome. We've had this conversation, the concept of farming or looking after your garden. And so there's a lot of things you can do without having to go and spend billions of dollars on stem cells and all that other stuff.
Right.
And the first thing is that you can feed your garden with prebiotics. And certainly the American diet is lousy when it comes to fiber and things. I think the average is 12 grams, which is ridiculous.
Wow.
Right? So
abysmal.
so you need to boost that. And do it gently, build it up with soluble fiber, then go on to the harder fibers. You need to vary your diet so that you get more and more and more different bacteria and colored fruits and, what does it, eat the rainbow?
Eat the rainbow.
Which is
30 plants a day.
Yeah. Well, if you can do 30 plants a day, is great, but
heroic.
Do it within reason. I'm a great believer in doing things within reason. Exercise. You don't need to go and run a marathon to do it. Go and have a nice walk in the woods. And by the way, it needs to be in the woods or in the mud. We've had this conversation because in the wood and the trees, we know that there are bacteria that are beneficial, of which Mycobacterium and Mycolicibacteria, like IMI, are par excellence. This is where you get exposure to these friendly organisms that will help to tune your immune system and make you feel better.
Very interesting. Yeah. And so do you recommend walking in the forest barefoot?
Yeah, why not? Just don't stand on any rattlesnakes. That's all.
I'm not gonna try that immediately. Maybe I'll stick with IMI for now. And IMI is a Mycolicibacterial, and it is important because it also supports our immune system. It's an immune biotic. So it's not a probiotic and it's not a prebiotic.
No.
How does an immune biotic contribute to our immune system?
So, if you listen to Professor Graham Rook, who sort of promulgated the old friends hypothesis, which is the new version of the hygiene hypothesis. The hygiene hypothesis used to say, you've got to eat a bit of dirt before you die. And grandma would tell you, you've got to eat a peck of dirt before you die, right? Mm-hmm. But actually, the hygiene hypothesis is more sophisticated, and there are three components to it. One is that you have to have exposure to certain infections,
okay,
and particularly in childhood. And some of them can be quite tough, but the basis is that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So that's an important trigger. So, it's like when we were kids, if there was, a case of German measles or whatever it is going around among the kids, the mums always used to get together and bring the kids and shove them, let them sleep together. So they all caught German measles and got it out of their system, right? Now we deal with it, well, hopefully with vaccinations and stuff, but measles, German, these things can be quite nasty, but generally they strengthen the immune system. The second thing is that you need to have an exposure with your parasites and things that are out there. There are lots of parasites that live and are around us. Anybody with a dog or a cat will know all about worms and stuff. And we get worms. If you look at tribesmen in parts of Africa, the Hadza tribesmen, right, or the Amazonian Indians, they will have worms, but it'll actually do them good. It doesn't kill them, mm-hmm, right? I think persuading people to go and start eating worms might be a bit difficult, and I'm not talking about earthworms, we're talking about parasitic worms, so not necessarily a good idea. Mm-hmm. And then the third is the environmental commensals. Commensals are a kind of parasite, if you like, but they help you. And that's where the Mycolicibacteria par excellence come into play. Mm-hmm. So they're present in the mud and in the soil and in the water in our environment. Our natural, original environment where we used to live, not the concrete jungles of New York and what have you that we now live. So you don't have these bacteria, and you're not getting exposure to them, and therefore you're not getting any kind of tuning effect. It needs regular interventions or exposure so that you tune your immune system. So instead of going off and eating lots of mud and rolling around in or what have you, if you're finding it difficult, go get some IMI. That's a major resource.
Helps you bring the forest to the city.
Bring the forest to yourself, and it'll help
you. This all sounds just like exposure, right? I asked you previously, what does it mean to be over-sterilized? Because I previously thought germs are bad. Bacteria's always had a bad rap. I'm like, bacteria, no, I don't want that. And now you're telling me that actually to maintain a healthy immune system, I need exposure to bacteria.
Yeah.
I need exposure to healthy bacteria as well as have recovery from bad bacteria, but that contributes to my diversity.
Friendly bacteria,
Friendly
I think, is
bacteria.
not just bacteria. The microbiome is much more sophisticated. We don't even know the half of it, because it's not just bacteria. There are viruses, bacteriophages, yeasts. Goodness knows what else there is in the
Lots of
microbiome,
stuff.
right?
Mhm.
So we don't really understand it, but yeah, you need to make sure that you're getting that tuning from the your friendly mycobacteria. When I was a kid as a surgeon, we thought the body was sterile, and we knew the gut part of it, the lower part of the gut was dirty, if you like, and if we operated, we had to clean it out and give antibiotics so that the thing would heal. What we now realize is that bacteria everywhere. They're in your brain, they're even in your eye. It's extraordinary. And by the way, one of the important things that people should do, and we don't always stress this enough, is dental hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
I think dental hygiene is really, really important, because a lot of rubbish bad bacteria can live in there, and there's some link between one or two of these bad bacteria and Alzheimer's. So you've got to choose your friends. And when you
Choose
think
your friends wisely.
yeah,
I always
there are
say that.
47,000 different bacteria, probably in an average decent gut in terms of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ones that they've counted. But actually only a handful of bacteria are really nasty. The obvious ones are typhoid and cholera and streptococcus and staphylococcus. In fact, most staphylococci, they colonize the skin, are entirely harmless. It's just if you overdo the antibiotics or you change the milieu, you encourage the weeds to come into the garden, and then you get a Staph aureus and you'll get an infection.
Mm-hmm.
The same applies with antibiotics. If you give people too many antibiotics, you destroy the microbiome, which manages to fight with each other and jockey for position, and you take out all the good and friendly bacteria, and the nasty bacteria then take over, and you end up with what's called hospital-acquired infection, C. difficile, and it's horrible. It looks like somebody's taken a blowtorch onto your colon. I mean, the colitis you get from it is nasty, and those patients used to die. Now, we used to try and treat them with antibiotics, and there is one called vancomycin. You get 30-40% response rate, and then it recurs. If you give them a stool transplant, you restore the friendly bacteria, you get 94% cure.
You're really getting me onto these poop pills. Fecal transplants? Really? That's going to be our future.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm excited for it. Okay, I want to take a pin really quickly, though, because I agree with you. Dental hygiene is extremely important. What are you pro mouthwash? Against? What can we do to protect our dental hygiene?
I'm not. I don't think you need mouthwash. What I think you need is mechanical cleansing.
Okay.
It's actually mechanical cleansing. So interdental brushes and things are the thing, and making sure your teeth, if they're bad, that the dentist sorts them out. But I don't think mouthwash and all that's necessary. I think it's mechanical cleansing that's the critical factor, and then that means you don't get these caries organisms or what have you.
Even floss is controversial these days, because they say that major floss or common floss brands have PFAs, forever chemicals.
Yeah.
And these polychemicals are they live forever because they're called forever chemicals because they never break down.
Sure.
But the exposure to us is one of these major environmental toxins that we've talked about, which are we're exposed to inflammation every day. We might be exposing ourselves through rain jackets, pots and pans, floss. Yeah. But these are all things that we can do we have to identify the toxins in our environment and also, address the inflammation appropriately.
Yeah. And these forever chemicals are a big worry. These microplastics, for example, are now being found in the brain of
brain.
Yes, of all sorts of creatures and animals, and causing problems. You're finding in the blood vessels in the brain.
And in humans.
And in humans.
So we consume about a credit card's worth of microplastic annually, and that's very scary. But we don't know what that means, right? What is it like to consume that much plastic in a year, and how does that show up in our bodies? Like, is there endocrine disruption? what can we expect when we're consuming plastic?
The jury's still out. We don't know. The only evidence I've seen recently has been physical or mechanical obstruction of tiny blood vessels with the microplastics in experimental animals. But of course, the microplastics get into the cells. They swallow, and your immune cells will swallow them. We've talked about the macrophage. The macrophage is a really important immune cell. It macro big, and phagos eater. It's a big eater. And the macrophage is like your Rottweiler. It wanders around.
Your hungry hippo?
Yeah. And it'll, anything, if there's a bacteria wandering around, it'll eat it and kill it. If there's a cell that's broken down and dying, it'll eat it up. If you've damaged something, it'll come in and nibble it away and reconstruct it. So the macrophage is really important. If you go and clog that up with microplastics and it's not functioning properly, maybe that's not such a good idea, but we don't know yet. I don't know.
So this macrophage is actually what you spoke about earlier with this repair mechanisms, right? Like we need our immune system to be healthy because this contributes to longevity. I think most times we've broadly outlined what longevity is. It's being healthy, reducing your inflammation, improving your quality of life, therefore your health span. But very few people talk about what it means to protect your immune system.
Yeah.
In relation to longevity. And all of it goes back towards extending your repair. All of it goes back towards enhancing your repair mechanisms, making sure that they're intact as you age.
Yeah, and so that you've got a good quality repair, if you like, and it's not botched. And that's why innate immunity, because immunity is divided grossly into adaptive and innate immunity. The adaptive immunity is learned immunity, which you learn from your environment, but it takes time. Adaptive immunity takes time. Innate immunity is instant, and that's what really controls things like assaults from bacteria that have come in to try and get into your body, and you can kill them, repair, cancer, dead cells, which we have all the time. We're losing cells that die, and these come along and repair it and gobble them up and get rid of them. Phagocytosis, if you want to call it, and apoptosis and phagocytosis. But the innate mechanism is, provided it's working nice, it's like your computer. If you've got a nice desktop and you clean it, you keep it clean, and it lasts a long time. If you don't help it to clean itself, it gets corrupted. All the data all the junk comes on board, and the thing stops working properly. It's so clagged up with data or whatever it is. And that's where I suppose microplastics and pollution worry me slightly. If it clags up the system so you can't really see what's going on, that doesn't sound like a good idea.
Absolutely not. And so what we're basically built in with our innate immunity, right? Can we stimulate? Can we enhance? Can we boost our adaptive immunity?
Adaptive immunity, yes. Well, I mean, the classic way of boosting your adaptive immunity is by vaccination.
Okay.
Right. So, and that teaches you to recognize, I don't know, measles or mumps or tetanus toxoid or whatever it is. And then when the actual organism comes, that's great. But then it's not quite so simple. We've tried to do it with COVID, and COVID vaccines and things, and it hasn't worked quite as well as we would like. Probably because things like COVID require much more on the innate side, not the adaptive side of the innate immunity, because you get also an autoimmune reaction. You get the cytokine storm with COVID. What kills you in COVID is a variation on a cytokine storm. The other problem with COVID that worries me is that it doesn't leave the body. It sits there in the nerves and wanders around, a bit like herpes viruses sit in your nerves for a long time.
That's scary. Yeah. So can IMI help us with post-viral infections and the recovery?
Yeah. Well, so we've talked about fibromyalgia, post-viral syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalopathy, all these terms that are basically a post-viral, generally, or post-infective syndrome. I mean, Lyme disease is one. It's not a virus, but you feel washed out and horrible. So you've got all these patients who are washed out, and in the past they'd go and see their doctor, and the doctor would do the blood test. They all look reasonably normal. I say, "Oh, look, there's nothing wrong with you. You just, you're just wimping out. Get a grip on yourself, and man up, right?" And it's taken long COVID to make us realize that it's a very, very real entity. For goodness sake, 20% of the population seems to be having problems with long COVID, particularly the younger generation, and washed out and anxiety and all these things that are a consequence of this post-viral syndrome. And you only realize that there's a post-viral syndrome because you have to test the immune system in such a way that you got to test its response. It's not just a simple blood test that you go around to to your doctor and he checks it. You've got to drive it to make sure whether it's working properly or not. And it's difficult to treat unless you have a way of dealing it with something that is good on chronic inflammation. You don't want to give steroids or anything. We've had some extraordinary reports, haven't we? With
and it's natural. It's not medication.
IMI has been fantastic because lots and lots of comments that we've had from people say, "Hang on a minute, I actually feel well. I feel better." We saw this, by the way, in the cancer patients. So that's what made us twig that there was something very exciting.
Not only in cancer, but in Lyme disease. I have this review ahead of me. I have this review in front of me, which is a patient who had Lyme disease. She has since recovered, but she left us a very long review about chronic inflammation and her joint swelling. She says, "I was introduced to IMI. I was a bit skeptical. After taking it for a few weeks, my joint pain had completely disappeared. I no longer have swelling in my hands and knees, and I'm able to enjoy more foods than I have in 7 years. Eating out isn't a problem for me anymore, and I rarely have food-related flares. The neuropathy in my feet has almost entirely disappeared, and I'm able to handle stress better than I ever have in my life." So it
how wonderful is that?
It's pretty powerful. I'd take bacteria over medication any day if I could have this kind of response.
Yeah. But with the cancer patients, as I said, and these were lung cancer patients, and we had hundreds of patients. Like, this wasn't sort of 3 patients. We saw this extraordinary effect on anxiety, dealing with anxiety, coping behavior, resilience, which was obvious when you compared it with those who weren't on the Mycobacterium. And it was also interesting that they just tolerated it so much better. They coped with everything. And I think the other thing that was fascinating about them was they said, "Look, I was sick. I'm on chemotherapy. We've just gone through the winter. All the family came down with coughs and colds and flu and viral infections. I didn't get anything.
Yeah,
I'm the person who was weak and should have got it, you see." So that's what tells us that there's something really interesting going on.
That IMI is helping to boost your built-in resilience. Yeah. The people that you're mentioning with Lyme disease or who are suffering from long COVID fatigue, would you say that they have pretty crappy innate and adaptive immunity?
Well, they're certainly corrupted.
It's corrupted.
Yeah, because they're not responding correctly. And I think I told you the story of my own son, who got glandular fever, Epstein-Barr virus, and a parasite called toxoplasma, which normally most people don't even know. They get it as children. They didn't even know they've had it. It doesn't matter. But this was very virulent. And he couldn't get out of bed for 12 years. And it was only when we injected him, I had to inject him at the time because that's how we were doing the cancer cases, and we were doing safety studies. So I injected him with this stuff. And magic, it was fantastic. It worked. So I don't need any convincing because my own son responded, right? After 12 years of not being able to get out of bed, he took up his bed and walked, right? So hopefully people with fibromyalgia, post-viral syndrome, and there's a lot of them out there, first of all, it's not something that you're imagining. This is a real thing. And people, if you're told that you're just imagining it, when you know damn well there's something not right, it really is devastating. It's very upsetting. So don't get upset out there. We understand.
Yeah.
And get out and do something about it.
So, I think this is so interesting. As somebody, I care very deeply and heavily about longevity, and I would like to keep my immune system healthy and well. how should I be thinking about my immune system from a longevity perspective? What are things that I can do or other people can do to help boost our immune system?
Well, there are extremes, aren't there? I mean, the mad billionaires have gone around and get virgin's blood and have it infused in them.
Parasymbiosis?
Yeah, and parasymbiosis and all, and stem cells and stuff. I think that's just a bit extreme myself, and we can't afford it, most of us.
If someone wants to give me a blood boy, I could be convinced.
Yeah, there you go. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous, the amounts of money. Now, I think what you do is... all the things that you said, you've got to be happy. You got to cope with situations. So anything that helps you cope, and we know that IMI is a factor that does that and
builds resilience.
And builds resilience.
Yeah.
Your diet is absolutely fundamental. We've touched on things like prebiotics, which is an easy thing. I mean, that's just a no-brainer, right? I mean, it's not going to kill you to take a bit more fiber, right? And then make a bit more effort in terms of your variety so that you boost your microbiome. And like I said to you, I think the microbiome of a 100-year-old looks like the microbiome of a 20-year-old, and you know that's great.
And today I learned that this is also related to community because of your exposure to others through contact, right?
Exactly.
So we said before that your microbiome is only made up 3% of your diet, which is critical. It's important. It's one on your list, right? So we have to eat healthy, have diversity, farm the microbiome, but also our exposure contact-wise to our environment. That includes the people we're around, people that we hug, we kiss, we hang out with, and then also the environment itself, so the exposure. Yeah. These are all things that are so interesting because we've only thought about stimulating our microbiome just through food.
Yeah, it's not enough. Food isn't just enough. That's why we talk about the environmental contact. So you've got to go out into the forest and do your stuff out there. And swimming in wild water swimming seems to be very popular. You must get lots of microbiome stuff there.
It's actually a longevity sport.
Yeah. So and I think that anything that enhances your well-being, and that generally relates to how good your immune system is working. We know that because if you've got a nasty cold or flu, well-being goes out the window. You just feel, whereas if you're all hyped up and everything, it's great. And a bit of exercise, fantastic. Too much exercise, bad idea. We know that elite athletes and people who, the guys, for example, one of my chums wanted to get a six-pack, and he wanted it in 3 weeks. So he started doing all these crazy exercises, and he ended up injuring himself. He tore the muscles in his abdomen. So I'm sure he didn't do himself any good, and he would have immunosuppressed. Elite athletes, like racehorses as well, immunosuppress when they reach the peak because, they get a lot of interleukin-6 in their blood. And that's why they put them and isolate them so they don't get colds and viral infections.
What does interleukin-6 do?
It's the inflammatory marker. It's the sort of main indicator of inflammation in your body. It's called interleukin-6. It's a signaling chemical, a cytokine, and it's a byproduct of inflammatory process. One of many, but it's one that we can measure easily.
Amazing. Okay, so we've learned so much today. I think that the idea around inflammation leading to accelerated aging is critical to the longevity mission. Keeping sure that you're looking after your repair mechanisms in your body, new concept, is also not something that people generally talk about, right? Yeah. So all of the things that we listed and improving your microbiome is critical to that. And from a longevity standpoint, do you have any practices that you personally engage in?
Well, other than the things I told you about with farming my microbiome and my garden, as it were, I do reasonable exercise. I used to do a lot of exercise in my youth before surgery. I was Olympic grade fencer, so I was an elite athlete. It sounds great, doesn't it? But we were rubbish, really. We weren't very good. But it was good exercise.
I don't know. You look like an athlete.
Well, I did. But anyway, that helped, I think, to maintain one's strength and fitness. I think a bit of strength training is good, but without overdoing it. I probably do about 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day. That's all. I eat what I enjoy. I like a glass of wine. I don't get obsessed with, you've got to eat this or you mustn't eat that, or you do. Even with ultra-processed foods, I quite like the occasional crisp or Dorito or
Everything
whatever.
in moderation.
But yes, the problem is, one of them's great, but a whole packet is probably not such a good idea. But that's the problem. Once you eat one, you're going to end up eating the whole packet. That's the secret of bad ultra processed food, is it encourages you. It almost is addictive. And you can't stop eating, and like chocolates and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I try and vary my diet. I do my juicing. I think we've discussed. I love.
You add some red wine to your juices.
I do.
Maybe a little dash of this, some Bordeaux, some Burgundy.
No, it doesn't matter. I'm not fussy.
Yeah.
But I love my yogurt. I love my olive oil. I like honey. Mm-hmm. And I like my wife to be nice to me, because when she says hello, darling, in the morning, I know the rest of the day is just fine. It's okay. So
they do mean
de-stress.
Happy wife, happy life.
Yeah, why not?
Your biggest pro longevity tip. I like this one.
I really believe that. I think I've lived longer and better because I have a very good relationship with my family, who keep me happy, and the grandchildren are wonderful. And so you've got to enjoy your life, haven't you? And so getting obsessed, and I feel so sad for people where, they just, you mustn't eat this and you've got to, chill, enjoy.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Lifestyle creep. Take it me. You're relaxed.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I do have a question around hormonal balance, right? And I think that relates to aging as well, because you see hormone levels going all over the place nowadays, and we're dysregulated. For women, it's our T3, T4 hormone. For our thyroid hormone, we're very sensitive to that. Any cortisol spikes address that. Men have lower testosterone levels. Can the microbiome supplement our hormone regulation?
Well, the microbiome is basically a chemical factory. It's a fantastic factory. And so a lot of the materials and good things that we need, like, hormonal precursors and whatever, are actually made in the gut. Mm. So a good microbiome is going to help you generally in terms of your metabolism. Now, diet in ladies, you get phytoestrogens and stuff like that. So they're confounders, but if you take your phytoestrogens, that will keep you, hormonally well balanced from that point of view. Testosterone, there is some evidence, a paper came out recently of actually testosterone precursors being produced by the microbiome.
Oh, interesting.
Maintaining, yeah. So that's quite interesting. But testosterone isn't the be all and end all of it. It's that balance. It's all about balance in biological systems. And same with ladies. They go into the menopause. They get their hot flushes and stuff. There's a lot you can do in terms of diet to help yourself to get through that. It's a difficult time for a lot of girls. It's quite.
Yeah, we can expand. We should expand later on about how inflammation can drive some microbiome dysfunction and really be disrupting hormone levels, especially as our gut can regulate those.
Yeah, and stress can do that. I mean, the temperature changes that the girls go through, and the emotional changes that people go through in the menopause are quite dramatic, and induce a lot of stress, which can't be good for you. Mm-hmm. So even if you can try and reduce the stress, that will help. But on a cold winter's night, having a nice menopausal lady next to you with a bit of peach is actually quite nice.
You sound like you're speaking from experience. Thanks for joining us today. That's all the time we have.
Thank you very much.
See you next time.
Bye.